that. Okay, and here we go. First of all, a visit, and for this, we are going to have a little quick video, a visit to the tomb of Mordechai and Esther in Persia.
Man you had with
Quickly. The
Okay.
letter will be here any moment.
Here we go. In order to appreciate Megillah, the book of Esther, you need to know the context in which it was prepared and written. We believe that the Torah, the first 5 books of the Torah, were dictated word by word from God to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. And Moses took dictation. Like a secretary, take a letter. Every word in the Torah, the first 5 books, Zot Torah Sham Moshe, Lifnei Bnei Israel, Pi Hashem Biad Moshe. It was the word of God dictating by the hand of Moshe. That's what we believe. The subsequent books of the Navi, the books of the prophets, in what the Christians call the Old Testament, what we call the Tanakh, or the Nach, the Bible, is were written by prophets. They were not dictated by God to the prophet. Rather, we believe God imbued that prophet with a spiritual understanding of what to write. And so Joshua wrote the book of Joshua. Shmuel, the prophet Samuel, wrote most of Shmuel Aleph. He wrote the book of Ruth. He wrote certain books of that period. Shlomo, King Solomon, wrote a whole bunch of books. Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. Other books, David wrote most of the Psalms, Tehillim. The book of Esther was written under the leadership of Mordechai the Jew, Mordechai HaYehudi. It must be recalled that unlike every other book of Tanakh, of the Bible, this book was written in the face of heavy censorship. In order for this book to get out and distributed and survive, it had to get through the censors of King Ahasuerus. It had to be written in a way that the king would not be opposed to it. Also, the king had made Mordechai by the end of the book like the number 2 guy in the kingdom, and the king was married to Esther. And if they would write anything bad about the king, it could not only result in Mordechai being demoted, but maybe executed. Also Esther. Consequently, because we know this king had his wife Vashti killed and had other people killed. And one minute Haman is number 2 in the kingdom, and the other moment he's hanging on a gallows. So you have to be incredibly careful. I think about it nowadays, local TV news reporters, when they interview Benjamin Netanyahu, they want to break a news story and they try to get him into trouble, not necessarily out of anti-Israelists, but in order to get a great story. So he's been interviewed by some people who've asked him on film, you've spoken with Joe Biden. Come on, what's the story? Does Biden have all of his marbles? Is he showing signs of Alzheimer's? And Netanyahu responds, I've never met a sharper guy. He's on the mark, and I've never met somebody so sharp. If you know how to listen carefully, you know that Netanyahu's been a prime minister for 16 years. He's dealt with a lot of presidents and world leaders. There's no way, under any circumstance, that Biden is the smartest and sharpest of all, even if Biden is at his best. And it's not even a put down of Biden. In the last 16 years, there's been someone Netanyahu has met who's smarter and sharper than Biden. When he tells you he hasn't met anybody smarter and sharper than Biden, he's leaving it for you to figure out that Biden is losing his marbles. But Netanyahu's not going to say that and get Israel in trouble and risk having weapons sanctioned. So he says what he has to say. And he says it in a way that you know he doesn't mean it. And if you're not sharp, you don't get what he's saying. That's how Mordechai wrote Megillah. It had to get past Achashverosh in a way that everybody would understand the story, except for Achashverosh. And Achashverosh would take it as a compliment. The Talmud tells us that Achashverosh is very evil, more evil than Haman, one of the worst anti-Semites of all time. The Megillah gives the impression that he's just an innocent, naive guy who gets persuaded by Haman to authorize the killing of Jews, and then gets persuaded by Esther to rescind that, or not exactly rescind, but to override that with a subsequent decree that would allow the Jews to destroy their enemies. But the Talmud tells us that Achashverosh was far, far worse than Haman, but they couldn't put that into the book. So they had to write it in a way that you figure it out. And with that background, we start understanding in chapter 1. It begins with the Jews participating with everyone else at a massive national banquet celebrating Achashverosh's anniversary as the king over 127 provinces. I may cough a few times during class. It's the aftermath of a bronchoscopy. There's always a few days coughing afterwards. So don't be surprised if I do. So you've got a celebration. Everybody's there, including the Jews. For all I know, there was kosher food. It must have been. The Jews in those days, they didn't have Reform Judaism. They didn't have conservative Judaism. Jews kept kosher. Either special kosher food would have been brought in, or they would have been very careful what they ate, which is what, if you've ever worked I worked at law firms, non-Jewish law firms. Where I could, I would have them bring in kosher food. Where I couldn't, I would work around and have melon, cantaloupe, honeydew. So the Jews are there. The rabbis tell us God was very upset, so to speak, with the Jews being so proud and over the top that they are holding places of great importance at this banquet. Look, we've made it in Persia. We're just like the non-Jews around us. We are accepted and we're all part of this nation. God did not want that Jewish mindset. Yes, in my goodness and kindness, I have allowed you to live in a time where you are treated as equals and there's no anti-Semitism, but attribute that to Chaste Hashem, to God's kindness, and not to your political acumen. And because you don't get it, I'm going to have to give you a potch. I'm going to have to give you a smack and bring home to you, you're only as secure as I, God Almighty, choose for you to be. And it's a tremendously foreboding lesson for American Jews who think we've made it. You got Bernie Sanders in the Senate, and he can lead the way with Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, and with the anti-Semite Chris Van Hollen of Maryland and Elizabeth Warren, and they could just lead the way attacking Israel. Because Bernie Sanders is a Jew, he's made it. Ben and Jerry, Ben Cohen, Jerry Siegel, we can boycott Israel because we've made it in America. George Soros, we've made it in America. Now Charles Schumer getting up, using the floor of the U.S. Senate. I'm a Jew, and I'm still the Senate majority leader because we Jews have made it in America. We are one Haman short of being exterminated. The wrong deal, the wrong thing, always in every society. We made it in other societies likewise. And then overnight, everything turned around. As it's out, I mean, I'm not going to start exaggerating and saying that we're now in the middle of like Nazi Germany. God forbid. We're doing great. We're doing it look, I'm doing this publicly. And I just came out of a hospital where the rabbi, everybody's calling Rabbi, and God, can I do this for you, Rabbi? Can I do that for you? Non-Jewish people. And we had a little kosher refrigerator that the hospital provided us. So the rabbi could order if there's food he wants that we can't give him. He could get Instacart and he could leave it in his own refrigerator. Everybody, we Jews have it great in America. Even in these times with this anti-Semitism at Harvard and MIT and Columbia and Penn and all of these places, we have it good. Let's not forget it. But we have to attribute that to Chaste Hashem. It's by God's mercy. And when Jews stop remembering and loving God and instead decide we've made it, we don't need a partner in our enterprise anymore, we're doing fine on our own, that's when it all collapses. And that's what happened here in Purim. The Jews decided we're doing fine, we don't need a partner, and it all collapsed. So what happened? King was married to Vashti. Who's Vashti? The Babylonians who exiled the Jews from Eretz Israel, that was Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, after his life, the next king was his son, Marduk. After Marduk came Belshazzar. Belshazzar, according to the Midrash, Vashti was the daughter of Belshazzar. She was the daughter of Belshazzar, the granddaughter of Marduk, and the great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She came from royalty, according to that tradition. When the Persians and the Medes overcame and destroyed the Babylonian Empire, the Midrash tells us that Darius, Yavesh, the king of Persia, took her among those whom he took and gave her to his son Achashverosh. So that's a Midrash. According to that Midrash, Achashverosh was perhaps the son of King Darius, and later rose to be the king of the 127 provinces of the empire. Vashti was, at the same time as this massive banquet was taking place, Vashti was running a separate banquet for the women of the kingdom. According to the Midrash, Vashti was extraordinarily evil. She showed off her body, very often was naked. She wasn't ashamed to be seen naked, and she forced many of her servants to be naked, particularly the Jewish servants. She forced her Jewish servants, according to the Midrash, to work on Shabbat and to work naked. Where she might strut her stuff, she forced people not in the mood to be naked naked in public, just to bring them down to shame. On this particular day of the banquet, when Achashverosh, who could not handle wine, he could not handle his alcohol well, and regularly we see throughout the Megillah that when he drank, he lost all self-control, and in some cases even could be persuaded instantly to order trusted servants to be executed. He had no control when drunk. So he's sitting with his aides, and they get into a big fight. Which people have the most beautiful women? Denise and I once watched an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, where Larry's taking an Uber and he gets into a big argument with the Uber driver, who I think came from Romania. And in the course of their small talk in an Uber, the man says, the most beautiful women in the world are from Romania. And that Gary and Larry start saying, no, I don't think so. And they get into a big fight over whether the women of Romania are the most beautiful women. And finally, the Uber driver throws him out of the car and rates Larry a 0 on his Uber rating. So nobody now picks up Larry anymore for Uber, and he has to take the buses. And that becomes part of that storyline of that episode. So in the same way, so it's like a real thing. People do that. Of course it's fiction, it's ridiculous, but that's what the world is. The world is kind of fiction if you think about it. And it's definitely ridiculous. And a bunch of drunk men now start getting into arguments. Who's got which country has the most beautiful women? The Persians or the Medians or the Babylonians? And amid this idiocy, Achashverosh says, well, it doesn't really matter. All I know is that my wife is prettier than all of them. So they get into an argument and the others say, show us. We don't believe it. So he says, okay, he's drunk enough. He gives the order, she should show up naked. She gets the order. According to the Midrash, she was not a modest woman and would have shown up naked, or would have shown off her naked body. But God, by a miracle at that moment, struck her with a body rash. Some say it was leprosy. Some say it was a body rash. There's a third opinion that God sent the angel Gabriel, who attached a tail, like an animal's tail, to her backside. And she refused to show up naked. She sent the message back. He said, I don't want to hear you. You come back naked. And she sent a very harsh message, according to the Midrash, that does not appear in the text, where she said to him, my great-great-grandfather, my father, they could drink. They were men. They could drink. And they could hold their liquor. You are a bum. You are a stable boy whom my father raised up to be a person of consequence. And don't ever forget that compared to the royal lineage from which I come, you are a bum and you can't hold your liquor. Because he was drunk and he couldn't hold his liquor, when he got that message, which was read to him in the presence of his cabinet, his leading officers, he was so humiliated and angered that he ordered that she be executed. And that's the end of Vashti, and that's the end of chapter 1. It's interesting, in the text it tells us that he ordered that Vashti be come in. It nowhere tells us that he said Vashti should come in naked. That would not have gotten past the censors. If he were sober while looking through the text, he would not have wanted distributed to 127 provinces that he ordered his wife to show up naked. Once he was sober, he realized that's not a thing you do. So Mordechai knew he had to figure out a way to convey that she was commanded to come in naked. So the way Mordechai put it is that Achashverosh ordered that Vashti be brought in and she should wear her royal crown, knowing, the authors knowing, that if she's wearing if she's wearing her royal crown, she's always wearing her royal crown. That's Vashti. She's the queen. So if he's saying that she should come in wearing the royal crown, what's that saying? It means she should show up wearing only the royal crown, Beketer Malchut. And that was the meaning of that particular text. Let's take a very, very close, as I said, I'm not going to be reading everything, but let's just understand like where that comes from and what I'm talking about. So, does it say it? Let's find it. Bring Vashti before the king wearing a royal crown. What does that mean? She always wears a royal crown. It means wearing only a royal crown. And that's how we know that he asked or instructed that she be brought in. Now, the last point in this chapter, very important, because she will not come, and he orders her to be executed, he also orders that a royal decree be written and circulated among the 127 provinces. And the royal decree, by order of the king of the empire, all wives must respect their husbands. Let it be written in the annals of the people of Persia and Media that it should be told first what happened with Vashti, and it should be told that she's being replaced. She's being replaced. And furthermore, it's being told that the women in this kingdom have got to yitnu v'chol hanashim yitnu yakor l'va'alehen, that all wives must treat their husbands with respect. What kind of decree is that? The purpose of that decree, he doesn't know it, is to place in the minds of the people that the king is nuts. They may not say it publicly, they'll get executed. But it is critical that people understand the king is nuts and he issues crazy royal decrees. In other words, I'm not talking about the politics of Obama, Trump, Bush, Biden, where your politics, you may feel that Trump issued an executive order, equivalent of a decree, that you think is nuts, or Biden or Obama issues an executive order equivalent to a decree that you feel is nuts. You may feel they're nuts, but the decrees, the executive orders, are not like really, really sicko stuff. Again, they may be, in your particular opinion, politically sicko, but there's a whole different level of sicko if, like, Joe Biden or Donald Trump or George Bush or Reagan or Obama would issue a presidential executive order, women have to treat their husbands with respect. Aside from the fact you couldn't do that nowadays because of political correctness anyway. But if it would be instead that all husbands have to treat their wives with respect, maybe that would get through political correctness. But that's not what an executive order should be. And this becomes extremely important because, unknown to us yet, but we will know soon, is that he's going to issue a decree that the Jews should be killed. And it is very important that they already have internalized, we don't know what to make of these royal decrees from this guy because he's nuts. So everything has to be taken with a grain of salt, chapter 2. In chapter 2, he now begins to miss his wife. She's gone. He's lonely. And his advisors say, well, let's help you find a new wife. How am I going to find a new wife? They haven't created a dating app yet. I can't swipe on the right or the left. And so they say, here's what you should do. You should have a national beauty contest. All things being equal, you're not looking to, you don't care about their personalities, do you? I mean, bottom line, you didn't call Vashti into the party to show everybody her personality. So all you care about is what they look like anyway. So have a beauty contest, pick Miss Persia, and you'll have a wife. So he agrees and he does it. What they do is they put out the word and women start hiding. Women do not want to be called to this contest for the following reason. And by the way, Judaism has something similar in this regard. Someone who has been married to the king of Israel, like King David, King Solomon, King whoever, if the king dies before the wife, that woman is forbidden to be married to any other man ever again. It's not like in the United States when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, Jacqueline Kennedy married the world's richest guy, Onassis, that Greek tycoon. It was a scandal in America, by the way. The wife of the president of the United States, it's hard to swallow that she's marrying anyone after she was married to the beloved John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated. But at least marry an American patriot, Democrat, Republican. But to marry a Greek, not that there's something particularly different about Greeks than Irish, but to marry a non-American, it was a scandal. When Teresa Heinz, the wife of United States Senator John Heinz died in an aircraft accident, and his widow, fabulously wealthy, she inherited the Heinz ketchup and Heinz baked beans fortune. And she then went on to marry John Kerry, then a senator out of Massachusetts, later ran for president. When a wife of a king of Israel, when the king dies, no one's allowed to marry that wife. There's a midrashic opinion, and an opinion some rabbis say another king of Israel may marry her, but no one else. And some say even another king of Israel may not marry such a widow. So now you have the problem with this beauty contest in Persia. Likewise, anybody whom the king of Persia physically penetrates in an act of intimate penetration, unless he marries her, she never may be intimate with any other man the rest of her life. So he's going to have this beauty contest of women who are, let's say, around 20 or 25, and maybe they have 30 to 50 more years of life. They're single. He's not taking married women. And if he doesn't choose to marry them, but he tries them out, so to speak, they'll never be able to have a man love them, or be able to love a man, or to have children, or to live like a normal. They'll have to live the rest of their lives in a harem. So that's what's going on here. He has two srisim. A sris is a eunuch. He has two men, Hega or Hegai, and Sha'ashgaz. Hega or Hegai is in charge of women who are being held for the king's, for whatever the reason the king wants them held, in a massive holding place. Beit Hanashim, the house of unpenetrated virgin women. Hega is in charge of them. Sometimes referred to Hega, sometimes Hegai. So all the women who have been recruited for this beauty contest are now being held under the custody of Hega in the house of the women. And that's partly why he's been castrated. He's been made into a eunuch. He's been made into a eunuch because he's surrounded by the country's most beautiful women, and they don't want him touching any of them. And even though he would know perhaps that if he did, it could be on pain of death, people get themselves in that kind of trouble all the time. But if they're made into eunuchs, helps keep that problem resolved. So he takes all these women into custody. He doesn't go grabbing them. They get grabbed by the law and order, the police who drop them off at his door. And he is in charge of them. And he takes a liking to Esther, the Jewish woman. No one knows she's Jewish. It's kept a tight secret. And he decides to give her special privileges. The women being held, one by one, are going to be introduced to the king. And they're going to have one and only one opportunity to make that impression, to be selected. Or else all the losers, 99.99% of them, will spend the rest of their lives as forcibly held in that building, never to be married or loved. He gives Esther special perfumes. For those women, there's a difference between sometimes a cheaper perfume and a more top-of-the-line perfume. He gives her the top-of-the-line cosmetics, top-of-the-line perfume. Secondly, well, we'll get to that in a second. And the idea is, ba'erev hi ba'a, u'baboker hi shava. One by one, each candidate is taken for one night with the king. And he's going to sleep with them in bed. And he's going to sleep with them, and he's going to do them. It says at night but it doesn't spell it out that graphically. Rather, it says, ba'erev hi ba'a, u'baboker hi shava. At night, she would come in, and in the morning, she would go back. That's going to be, let's just look at the text. Just look at the text. Okay. Ba'erev hi ba'a, u'baboker hi shava. She'd go in the evening and leave in the morning. And it doesn't tell you where she's going, I just shared with you where she's going. And she's not going back to the house of the single women, of the virgins, that's run by Hega. Rather, she's going back, having been penetrated, she now goes to the Beit HaPilagshim, the house of the concubines, women who already have been, their virginity has been taken from them. And that one is run by a different guy, Sha'ashgaz. Hega runs the house of the women, Sha'ashgaz, the Pilagshim, and he's also a Sris. He's also a eunuch, again, a eunuch. He's also a eunuch for the same reason. So these women, one by one, are brought in. And the book of Esther is written at the same time like an interesting novel. So that what's going on is little pieces are being put into the storyline that will come up later. We're told, for example, Ish Yehudi Haya b'Shushana Bira. There was a Yehudi. Yehudi means one of two things. It could mean a Jew. A Yehudi is a Jew. It also could mean, alternatively, a person from the tribe of Yehuda, Judah. Is he from the tribe of Judah? Shemo Mordechai, his name is Mordechai, Ish Yemini, which means Yemini is from Binyamin. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. So is he from Benjamin? Or is he from Yehuda? One opinion is Yehudi here is not referring to the tribe of Judah, but he's a Jew. There's a Jew in Persia from the tribe of Benjamin. The other side would be, if he's from the tribe of Benjamin, of course he's a Jew. And so, well, maybe not, depending on the it depends on the mother. But there's an opinion that what it means is you have two parents, and his father was from Benjamin, and your religion comes by your mother, but your tribe is based on your father, like a Kohen. If your mother's a Kohen, does not make you a Kohen. If your father is, that makes you a Kohen. So there's an opinion that what it means is that his father was from Benjamin, and his mother was from the tribe of Yehuda. And that's who he is. He's a member of Anshe Knesset Agdola, the men of the Great Assembly. These were the 70 leading rabbis, rabbinic scholars, and leaders of the Jews at the time. One of the things that all Anshe Knesset Agdola shared, that all these men of the Great Assembly had in common, to be a member of the Great Assembly, you had to know 70 languages, all the known languages at the time. It would be like voting in California and being able to understand every single page of the election ballot. When you get a ballot in the mail in California, it comes in like 70 different languages. Every language except for Hebrew. Arabic, Arabic left, Arabic right. Somalian, Ethiopian, Tagalog, English, Spanish, Portuguese, Turkish, every language, Armenian, everything but Hebrew. For that, you have to take the thing and put it on Google Translate. So he had to know every one of 70 languages. That is important because after Esther, he's her uncle. After Esther is taken into the king to be the queen, Mordechai starts hanging around right outside the castle, the palace, so that he can be abreast of what's going on, how his niece is doing. And one day while he's at with the other men, it's in all these ancient places, it was very common that the richest, most famous people would sit at the gates. There's that in Eshet Chayil, chapter 31 of the book of Proverbs, Sefer Mishlei, where Shlomo HaMelech writes Proverbs, and he talks about that no daba sha'arim ba'ala imziknei Arutz, that part of the woman of valor is that her husband is known among the elders at the gates. No daba sha'arim ba'ala v'shivto imziknei Arutz. So as a result, he would hang around with ziknei Arutz, with the non-Jewish powers that be and leaders at the gates. One day while he's there, two of the servants of King Ahasuerus, Bigtan and Teresh, plot the assassination of the king. And they speak openly in a foreign language that no one knows. Certainly no one there. But they don't know that one of the people there is Mordechai of the men of the Great Assembly. And he knows that language also. And without letting on that he knows what they're talking about, he learns about their assassination plot, and he gets the word to his niece, Queen Esther, to warn the king. An investigation follows. You don't just execute people on a rumor, and it is confirmed. Indeed, the two of them are planning to kill the king. So they are hanged. A good English grammar lesson When people are executed on a hanging, they are hanged. They are not hung. Clothing is hung. People are hanged. So they're hanged. Thus ends chapter 2, with Esther having told the king that Mordechai the Jew, again, she has not revealed that she's a Jew, but reveals that Mordechai the Jew passed along the news, the word of the assassination plot. And that's how I knew about it. That is going to turn out to be a turning point in the entire Megillat Esther, when the king is about to have the Jews killed, and for reasons we, God willing, will get to in this class, king will have his annals written, read to him, his chronicles, his autobiography. They didn't have a lot of books in those days. They didn't have codices that could be published, but a king had a scroll made of his life story. And at a certain point later on, we'll be discussing, if we have the time, God willing, they would read about his life story. And it happens to mention that Mordechai, that there was a plot to kill you, and Mordechai the Jew revealed it and saved your life. And that plays a critical role in Mordechai and the Jews coming out of this thing with a holiday instead of a day of mourning. From this, the rabbis of the Talmud learn, whenever you quote somebody, you must give their name, you must give mention to their name. You're not allowed, it's not just about academic rules of plagiarism. According to halakha, you're not allowed to quote someone from whom you've learned something without identifying the source. It's even more intense than Harvard's rules of plagiarism. And that's why you often will hear your rabbi in a sermon say something like, or I in my classes, I might say something like, I heard this following interpretation by Rav Avigdor Miller, or Rabbi Soloveitchik teaches this, or the Chacham Harav Avad Yosef taught that, or Lubavitcher Rebbe said this. It's not to show off that I've read that. I'm required to tell you my source. And we learn it from this story. And thus ends chapter 2. Esther is the queen. An assassination plot has been foiled. The assassins, the would-be assassins are executed. And we go into chapter 3, the rise of Haman. Haman is referred to as the Agagite. What's an Agagite? An Agagite, he descends from Agag, the king, a king who had been an Amalekite. So let's understand, Haman ben Hamdata ha'Agagi, Haman, the Agagite. Those of you at our Tuesday night class know, when we learned 1 Samuel Shmuel Aleph, chapter 15, that King Saul was commanded to wipe out, Shaul HaMelech was commanded to wipe out all of Amalek. And he failed to meet his obligation and the command when he defeated Amalek, but he allowed their king to remain alive. And God came to the prophet Shmuel, Samuel the prophet, told him, go to King Saul and tell him, because he did not execute Agag, as well as everyone else among the Amalekites, I am taking away his dynasty and giving it to someone more worthy. So rather than his son Jonathan, Yonatan becoming king, it'll go to someone else, whom eventually Saul figured out would be David ben Yishai, David the son of Jesse, from the tribe of Yehuda. So Saul failed to execute Agag, and according to our understanding, Agag, while in prison, impregnated a woman. Obviously, they did not have mixed gender cells, but they would have had women maybe involved in cooking for the prisoners. And somehow he was able to impregnate a woman. About a year ago, there was a story out of Israel in the Israeli news about an Arab terrorist in one of Israel's prisons having had sexual relations with women, Jewish women, Israeli Jewish women police guards, because of feminism and egalitarianism. So they're not allowed to not have women police prison guards. And several of them ended up having sex with this particular Palestinian terrorist. So Israel's minister of the police, Itamar Ben-Gvir, changed the rules. And by his order, women no longer are allowed to be guards. And if you ask yourself, how in God's earth could a Jewish woman, so it's not clear what that's all about. It's not clear whether the terrorists threatened them, that if they didn't submit to him, he would arrange to have some other people in the prison slaughter the woman, or she'd be gang raped anyway, or whether they're so uneducated, no way to know. It's the way Patty Hearst, how did Patty Hearst, after being kidnapped, suddenly become a member of the Symbionese Liberation Army? It's like, what's that all about? Sometimes a woman who, for whatever her reasons, gets involved with someone charismatic like the Charlie Manson gang, where these people, again, you ask yourself, how could Squeaky Fromm and all these, how did he get involved with Charles Manson, for God's sakes? And it's not, we're not going to spend the whole class on that. But Agag managed to get a Jewish woman pregnant, or somebody pregnant. The next thing you knew, over the course of a few more generations, that follows the father, and Haman was an Agagite, was an Amalekite. The Amalekites hate Jews, sort of like our modern day Middle Eastern Arabs. When you hear about how actually before Israel, Jews had it great with the Arab Muslims, not true. And those who attend the Sunday class may remember that fellow who did a 15-minute program about the real true history of Jews living under Arab Muslim monarchies and how horrible it was. There are certain people who just hate Jews. And so Amalekites hate Jews. So Haman becomes number 2 in the kingdom, and the king gives an order whenever Haman passes by and you're within your ambit, you need to prostrate before him, bow down. Everybody does. People are not looking for trouble. And it's that kind of world like modern day Iran. People just do that. Nobody starts screaming about First Amendment and separation of church and state, mosque and state. If they're told you bow down, they don't want to get killed. Everybody bows down except for Mordechai. So what's the deal with that? For that, we have to think back to the Tanakh and the Torah and the Bible. Yaakov Avinu, our third father, Jacob, patriarch Jacob. So Yaakov had his first wife. He wanted to marry Rachel, ended up marrying Leah, then married Rachel. Leah gave him 4 sons, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. That's 4. Rachel could not give him sons. She couldn't get pregnant. So she gave him her handmaiden Bilhah, who gave birth to 2 more sons, Dan and Naphtali. So that makes 6. When Leah no longer was giving birth, but saw that Rachel had given Bilhah, so Leah gave her maidservant Zilpah over to Yaakov, and she gave birth to 2 more sons, Gad and Asher. That makes 8. And then, again, reasons we won't get into tonight, Leah resumed being able to give birth, and she gave birth twice more to Yisachar and Zebulun. And so that's 10 sons. And then finally, Rachel got pregnant and gave birth to Yosef. With those 11 sons, now that even Rachel had given birth, Yaakov decided to up and leave the house of Lavan, his father-in-law and his uncle, because Lavan was the brother of Rivka, Yaakov's mom. And Yaakov took his 11 sons and his daughter Dinah and his 2 wives and the 2 maidservants. Some people say they became wives, others say they remained maidservants. And he started going from Lavan all the way back to Eretz Yisrael to reconnect with his father, Yitzchak, whom he hadn't seen for 20 years. But in order to get from Haran, where Lavan lived, in the area of Iraq, to Eretz Yisrael, he had to pass an area that was dominated by Esav, Yaakov's twin brother who wanted him killed. And the Torah describes how Yaakov feared that Esav would wipe them all out, and how Yaakov prayed and he sent gifts to calm Esav and mollify him, and prepared for war if he would have to fight. When Esav arrived with his 400 men, and we learned in our Tuesday night class several weeks ago how those 400 men, because they did not slaughter Yaakov and the family, that later in time God actually spared the lives of 400 Amalekites when King David was killing out all the Amalekites. Later on in history, 400 Amalekites were allowed at that point to escape on camel because of these 400 who came with Esav and did not hurt anybody. Well, what ended up happening was when Esav arrived, everyone, Yaakov and the entire family, all bowed, prostrated before Esav. You'll say to me, but I thought the Jews not supposed to bow, Jews are not supposed to prostrate before other people. This is before the 10 Commandments, right? This is before we went to Mount Sinai. It's the time of Yaakov. We haven't even gone to Egypt yet. So all the Jews bowed down. We got past Esav, who let us go. Esav and his 400 men went their way. The Jews continued on to Yitzchak. And on the road towards Ephrat in Judea, Rachel died in childbirth, giving birth to Benjamin. And she was buried at Bethlehem at Kever Rachel, Rachel's tomb. Many of you perhaps have visited there. And then the family went on, end of that story. That tells you something very interesting about Benjamin. Benjamin is the only Jew who did not bow down to a person. Everyone else had bowed down to Esav, but not Benjamin, because Benjamin had not yet been born. It became a mark of pride to the tribe of Benjamin. We are the tribe who never bends down. Sort of, if you're an American, each state of the 50 states has their slogan. Illinois, land of Lincoln. New York, the Empire State. Florida, the Sunshine State. California, the homeless state. And each state has their own thing. Texas, the Lone Star State. Missouri, the Show Me State. What's that all about? Show me what? What's that about? But no one knows, but they're the Show Me State. Benjamin was the we never bow down to anyone state. Back to Megillah. When everyone is bowing down to Haman, Mordechai says, I'm a Benjaminite. We are the no bow down to anybody state. I will not bow down to him. We Benjaminites do not bow down. Haman can react any of a number of ways to this. If he wants to be especially evil and cruel, he could order, if he can pull it off, to have Mordechai killed, executed for defiance. Haman has an enormously interesting response. Instead of taking it out on Mordechai, he decides, I want to use this as my opening to kill all the Jews. And we take it for granted. Mordechai wouldn't bow down, so Haman wanted to kill all the Jews. As I say, we took it for granted. But if you think about it, I want to give like a warning. I'm going to go on 30 minutes more. I'll let you can leave at any time. You always could leave at any time. You always can leave at any time. No one's going to be offended. Please feel free to do that. But I do want to go a little more, but I don't want to hold you past 8 o'clock, which already I like to try to keep my classes, these Tuesday and Thursday classes, to between 1 hour and 1 hour, 10 minutes. But as I say, it's a 15-hour class and I'm flying through it. So we'll go as far as 30 minutes more allows me, and then I'm going to stop. And whatever we don't finish, we'll finish in Jerusalem when Mashiach comes. And if that doesn't happen, then next year we'll do part 2. Continuing here. The normal thing should be that Haman would have Mordechai killed. We all take for granted that he responds by saying, I want to kill all the Jews. That makes no sense. Although if you live in the world today, it's a perfect example. Netanyahu or Israel has been responding to the Shabbat Shmini Atzeret October 7 massacre, as they're doing. Many people are supporting Israel. In the United States, a majority support Israel, despite all the bad publicity. The minority are made up of people who really, truly, sincerely feel for what they wrongly consider to be innocent Gaza civilians. But some of them really just, they don't know. They go on TikTok and that's where they get their news. And then there are a lot of Jew haters, like in London. There already have been quite a few reports. Every Saturday, 250,000, 250,000 people march peacefully every Saturday in London against Israel. There have been several reports coming out over the last many weeks that more than half of the people, including all the leaders of these rallies, are Muslims, are Muslim Arabs who've come into England during the recent years and have turned England around. There are certain people that just hate Jews. And Haman sees this as an Amalekite, as an opening to have the Jews killed. He goes to the king and says, Yeshno, am echad mefuzar ben ha'amim, v'tehem shonot mikol am. There is one nation among the 127 provinces. All the provinces, all the nations that you rule over as the king of 127 provinces. So it's like you have Canadians and Americans. Of course, America is polyglot, but let's just say you've got Americans, the Canadians, Spanish, the French, the Germans, the Irish. And then there's one group that doesn't have their own province, but they live among all the other provinces. That's the Jews. As when, before there was an Israel, there was no Jewish country. And even now in the diaspora, we live everywhere. So he said, look, I want to have him killed. And from where you're coming from, King Achashverosh, it's not going to throw you off. I'm not talking about lopping off any one of your 127 provinces. You won't even know they're missing. There's a few of them here and a few of them there and a few Mehodu Viat Kush from India to Ethiopia, but they're not going to, they don't define India. They don't define Ethiopia. You won't even know they're missing. And their religion is different from every other religion. It's like in the world today, like approximately, I don't know, half the world, 40%, I don't know, are Muslims, and maybe 40% are Christians. So they're Catholics, they're Protestants, and among the Protestants, there's Methodists and Episcopalians and Baptists and Lutherans, et cetera, but they're Christians and they're Catholics. And it's like two religious worldviews, the worldview that looks to Jesus, the worldview that looks to Muhammad. And what Haman is saying is, and then there's one small little group, Jews, that nobody knows what they're up to. And you won't miss them. So he persuades the king, I'd like to get rid of him. And as I've taught you, the Talmud tells us, Achashverosh actually was an evil man. He actually was evil. And he was all too happy to have the Jews wiped out. He did not take the initiative, but now that he's being asked, he said, okay. So he authorized Haman to oversee the obliteration of the Jews of the 127 provinces. What day, what time would this take place? This discussion right now between Haman and Achashverosh takes place on the first day of Nisan. The Jewish calendar begins with Nisan in April, the month of Passover. And Haman now runs two lotteries. First, the lottery of the 12 months. Which month will it be? Then he pulls the month of Adar. This is an extraordinary gift from God. No one knows this is a miracle. Everyone takes it for granted. No one even takes it for granted because they don't even realize what's going on. All the average Jew knows, even quote unquote religious Jews, they know that there was Haman and Mordechai, and this year I'm going to come dressed as Queen Esther. And nobody knows what's going on. Actually, what's happening is an incredible miracle. It's like April. Which month is he going to kill the Jews? Adar, the last month of the calendar. It's next March. That means instead of it being same month or next month, which gives the Jews no time to put together a defense or a strategy, the Jews are going to have a whole year to put a strategy together. It would be better to put it off to 20 years. But if they can only put it off from 1 to 12 months, this is extraordinary. It's the biggest miracle in the whole Megillah. That of all the possible days, it would be March, Purim time. Of course, it wasn't Purim time because there wasn't yet a Purim. That's going to be the end of the book. This is the second time there's been a miracle in the months. What was the first time? When the king was doing his beauty contest and trying out another woman every night for a year. We know it was a year because the text tells us that the women underwent 6 months of cosmetics and 6 months of perfuming. And so it was let's just take a very quick look. It's very important to understand what was going on in this story because people fly through it so fast and you have the Megillah reading and there's no time to look at the translation. With each girl's turn, the women that were candidates to become the queen, at the end of the 12 months treatment prescribed for women, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfume. So the women were held for 12 months. of the 12 months, ask yourself real quickly, some of you have learned this with me before, and if you haven't, just ask yourself real quickly, I'll tell you quick because we don't have time. What month would be the best month to have your tryout since you can't avoid it? They're going to force you to sleep with the king. And either you're going to get chosen queen or you're going to be single the rest of your life, living with these women with shashkas. The best month of the year would be a freezing cold month. If they call you in August or July, it's hot and schwitzy, and the king feels uncomfortable, he's not looking to embrace and hold a woman when he's sweating like a pig. On the other hand, if it's the middle of January, in those days they did not have indoor heating and indoor air conditioning. And yes, they had fireplaces, but if you ever have used your fireplace, whether wood burning or electric, that doesn't really always heat up a home. You end up sitting near the fire. For those of us who have fireplaces, you end up sitting right near the fireplace with a cup of cocoa. But if you expect to keep your house warm, it only does a limited job. You're freezing. That's the best time if you're going to be trying out 180 different women or 365 different women. The woman's got her best chance if it's the middle of the winter, when it's going to be so cold that he's going to be holding the woman anyway. By God's miracle, Esther was called in the middle of the winter. And that helped her also. So back to where we are. On the 1st of Nisan, or in the middle of Nisan, 13th. So it's getting to that point. First or second week of Nisan, Haman pulls 12 months from now, the last month of the year, next March, Adar, and then he does a second lottery and he gets the 13th day of the month. On the 13th of Adar, next year, he will kill out all the Jews. And so he has authority. That's the end of chapter 3, chapter 4. The king issues a decree. This is the same king who previously issued decrees that women should treat their husbands with respect. And the king basically, at the end of chapter 3, sends out the following decree. Sends out a decree that people may wipe out the Jews. And you can completely wipe out the Jews. And by my order, which is important because there are a lot of people in America now and in England. If Rishi Sunak, or whatever his name is, he's been pretty good as prime ministers of Europe go. Not great, but pretty good. And there are plenty of people in America at those rallies who would kill the Jews. Every so often there's something on the web of some imam in Dearborn, Michigan, urging the members of his mosque to kill Jews, even here in America. And God knows if Biden, of course he's not going to, of course, even the worst of them, even Elizabeth Warren and Chris Van Hollen, no one's going to say kill Jews, at least not at this point in history and not they. Nevertheless, if there were a decree from the President of the United States that on such and such day, and only that day, I'm giving free Killing the Jews Day, plenty of people would be there to line up if they knew they could get away with it. So written instructions were dispatched by the couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, massacre, and exterminate all the Jews, young and old, minar v'ad zaken, Jewish babies, like October 7 with Hamas, Jewish babies, young Jews, zaken, old Jews, tough, infants, nashim, women, b'yom echad, on one single day, infants, women, young and old, the 13th day of Adar, you've got Murder the Jews Day by order of the king. Do it as much as you like. And the word gets back to the Jews, and the Jews begin wearing sackcloth, which in ancient times is the way to convey your mourning and you're in grief. And Mordechai, who is of Anshe Knesset Agdola, one of the men of the Great Assembly, and as it happens, the uncle of the queen, sends a message to Esther. What's Esther? Why does she need a message? She has no clue as to what's going on. She is locked up in there like, what was it? Was it Rapunzel? Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair, and I shall climb the golden stair. It's like Rapunzel, the witch in the story, who's kept in the tower and never goes outside. Of course, there was the fractured flickers of Rocky and Bullwinkle with a Rapunzel one, if you remember that one. Anyway, she doesn't know what's going on. There's no TV, there's no smartphones, there's no smart cell phones, there's no computers, there's no newspapers. She has no clue. It's not that she's not smart. She has no clue that they just announced to kill all the Jews. She's sitting there having her curtain way and just avoiding spiders. I don't know. Mordechai sends the message. You need to know what's going on. And it says that he made a copy of the decree so she can read the decree. So first of all, we see she was able to read, unlike most of the women in that time in that empire. So he said, here's the decree, and he sent it to her. And I want you to read it and understand what's about to happen to all of us. And so she reads the decree, she's shocked, she trembles, she doesn't know what to do. The text of the document was to the effect that a law should be proclaimed that they're going to kill all the Jews. So Mordechai told him all that had happened. Basically, Esther was told, it was reported to her that that fellow Mordechai, we don't know whether you're a relative, you is a relative, we know you have some kind of connection with him, and that guy is sitting in the streets in mourning and sackcloth. He normally hangs around at the gates of the king, but no one's allowed to wear sackcloth in the presence of the gates of the king. So he's departed from the area of the gate of the king, and he's in sackcloth. She sends Hatach, her most trusted servant, to find out what that's about. And Mordechai tells Hatach what's going on and says, you've got to tell us to Esther. And Mordechai also gave Hatach the written text of the law that had been proclaimed for their destruction. He bade him to show Esther and inform her and tell her to go to the king. You've got to plead to the king. And she says, I can't do it because the king is crazy. And remember, they're writing the text that's of the book of Esther. It's got to get past the king. So it has to be written in a very sensitive way that when the king reads the book later, he's not made out to be a bad guy and doesn't see that she thinks he's nuts and is a pig. So she's simply saying, the text tells us, I can't do it because the king has a standing order. No one is allowed to approach the king for discussion unless the king requests their presence. But on your own, you can't come to the king. Except, let's say, in the public palace, let's say certain hours of the week, he sits and litigants can come before him for judgment. But to just have a private audience with the king, you can't do that. He'll have you executed. He has a golden scepter by his side as he sits on his throne. And if someone tries to meet him without first having been invited, the king just has to raise the scepter, and that tells his guards to execute the person on the spot. I can't do it. I can't approach the king. He hasn't asked to see me for the last 30 days. Mordechai tells her, I don't think you understand. The Jews of this empire are about to be exterminated, obliterated. We need you. And then he tells her famous words, Umi odea, and how do we know? Maybe it was for just this moment, and this reason, that you were placed by God in this extraordinary position of authority. Maybe that's why all this unfolded the way it did. The death of the prior queen, so that you would be the queen in a position to save the Jews. This gets quoted all the time when it is contextual in the modern era. Back a few years ago when Trump was president, there were many, many people. We now forget that the United States did not always recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and did not always have her embassy in Jerusalem. It used to be in Tel Aviv. And many people talked about, we've got to reach Ivanka, that by miracle, Trump, a non-Jew, his daughter is an Orthodox Jew, converted to Orthodox Judaism, keeps Shabbos, kids go to yeshiva, strictly kosher. And I saw so much literature. In fact, I wrote stuff like that. And who knows, just as God's plan was to put Esther where she ended up at that fateful moment, that he put Ivanka Trump, a complete non-Jewish woman, and made her overnight magic into an Orthodox Jew, the daughter of the President of the United States, who exerted enormous amount of influence and authority. He ruled by great unilateral authority, and he had great respect for her, and they're loyal to each other. And to this day, we will never know what role she played and Jared Kushner played, but we know that Trump made the embassy move. And so that's what Mordechai is saying. You have to go to him. And if he kills you, he kills you. But we don't have any choice. And I'm telling you this. I am telling you this. He says, if you don't do it because you're trying to save your own skin, if it is God's will that the Jews be saved, then salvation and succor shall come from another source. He'll send someone else to save the Jews. He has a lot of servants in this world. And if it comes to that, and you blow it and don't save the Jews, and instead he sends someone else, then we will be saved, and it will be you and your household who will end up getting obliterated and exterminated. Because you saw what happened to the last queen. The same king who could love you and treat you like royalty, because that's what you are now, can kill you just on a turn of just a bad, one drink too much, or just a bad bet. So if you want God's protection, you have to do that. She's terrified. She doesn't know what to do. She's a good person, but she's terrified. So she says, tell you what, if you will have the entire Jewish nation out here take 3 days of fasting and prayer, then I will do it. And so it is decreed by the Jews, 3 days of fasting. Sumu alai v'al tochlu v'al tishtu laila v'yom. That for 3 days, no eating, no drinking. The 13th, the 14th, and the 15th of Nisan into the first night of the Seder. And so the fast goes till the first Seder night. They fast into Pesach. And with that, she goes to the king. And she hatches a scheme. And she knows she may die. Her scheme, first, I want to cover as much as I can. I realize I won't be able to cover all 10 chapters, but I will have 5. We will have done half. And the one video I really want to show you, because this video helped me to understand what she's now about to do. I've read it 50, 60 times. I've read Megillah publicly for about 50 years now. And we'll be reading it in shul on Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat, and Sunday at 11 a.m. But after 30, 40, 50 years, it was only when I saw this scene in this movie, it runs about 6 minutes, that I gained a fuller appreciation of what she did and what she was doing at that moment. So I ask you to just put up with my way of teaching. I'd like you to just like to share this scene with you.
No leader is coming.
What?
I do not know what you plan, but
The king leaves for the outpost within the hour. I have not time to wait out this rain.
I am not going to allow you to kill yourself.
You'll be able to hear better in a few moments.
Please tell me.
Esther is in her palace room, and she has decided she will do what she has to do.
Of a man, you're going to Hall of a King. This is not you against him. This is you against protocol. You against the empire.
Before Goliath.
Stories.
David's victory.
It is my will that each of you obey him in every way exactly as you would regard your king. Prince of the Face.
This is Hamedan.
It is my will that each of you obey him in every way exactly as you would regard your king.
And she, of course, the king of Ashverosh.
summons she comes before the king. She does. Is protocol not broken?
Yes, protocol has been broken down.
And so she appears before the king. And she risks her life. And she proceeds with her plan. She's going to place a bug in the king's ear that she's having an affair with Haman. It does not say this in the text. It's for us to understand it. She has strategized how to convince the king that she and Haman are plotting to kill him so that he's out of the way. She'll then, as queen, marry Haman. He'll be the new king, sort of a variation on what later shows up in Hamlet, where the king is killed in a conspiracy between his wife and the king's brother. And so the king says, "What's up?" And she says, "I'd like to invite you to a special party I'm going to make tomorrow. It'll have a lot of wine, we'll drink and we'll get all cozy, and we're gonna have a really good time and get a little drunk and we'll have a good time." And the king says, "Oh, sounds great. Absolutely." And then she says, "But I'd like one more person at the party, Haman." And as a husband, you're asking yourself, what the heck is that all about? My wife wants to have some private, intimate time with me. Let's spend some time and we'll drink and we'll fondle and we'll play around. And Haman? So the king doesn't know how to process that, but says, "I'll go along with it." And so they gather Haman to come to the party. And a party takes place, the three of them laughing and drinking and having a good time. Obviously, nothing physical happens with Haman there also. And we go into chapter 5. And chapter 6. The king cannot sleep. It's time for go to sleep. And he's deeply bothered. It does not tell us why. I'm telling you why. He's thinking, is there a plot to kill me? Is my wife in cahoots with Haman? Meanwhile, Haman had gone back home and told his friends and his wife, "I am so highly ranked. I'm number 2 to the king. And the wife, the queen, invites me to come to her parties unilaterally and uniquely. I'm the highest person here. There's only one thing left for me to do, and life is perfect. I have to kill out Mordechai the Jew. And then next year, comes next March, we'll take care of the rest of them." So he builds a gallows on his property with which to execute Mordechai. And he will have that power as the number 2 in the kingdom and also the favorite of the queen. He doesn't know what's in Esther's mind. He took it as Esther really regards him as someone she really likes. He now goes to the king's palace just to get the king's permission to finalize the execution of Mordechai. That night, the king can't sleep. He can't sleep because he thinks it's a plot to murder him. So he asks his people to take out his book of Chronicles that tells his biography. He wants them to read his favorite book. What's your favorite book? His favorite book is the story about him. And so they, by God's miracle, they open up this book. They could have turned it to any page, any parchment on the scroll. It happens to be, it turned to the page when Mordechai revealed the assassination plot by Bigtan and Teresh. They start reading. Holy smokes, I forgot all about that. There was that assassination plot. Who was that guy? It says it in the book, Mordechai the Jew. Because Esther remembered at the time, and now it became a halacha, you must quote your source. And by virtue of her having done that, it was in the book. King says to himself, I see. Did I ever thank this guy? No, you didn't. I didn't? No. I didn't thank him? No. And the king begins to realize, that's why people want to assassinate me. I punish people when they don't do good, when they don't treat me well, and I don't reward people who treat me well. I don't give them an incentive to be loyal to them. That stops right now. From now on, if you're loyal to me, I'm giving incentives. And that way, if you hear about the latest assassination plot, like between Haman and my wife, when you see the way I reward people who inform me about assassination plots, maybe you'll do that for me too. He hears rustling in his backyard. Who's that? It's Haman. What's he doing here 3 a.m, 1 a.m, midnight? What's he doing here? Haman, it was bad protocol. Were you going to wake up the king? But he was so excited that he's going to hang Mordechai that he just wanted permission so he could do it right away. Maybe he knew the king normally is up late at night and didn't know the king went to sleep early this night because who knows? So they call him Haman, and the king says, here's the deal. There's someone in the kingdom, I don't want to mention his name, whom I really, really, really cherish, and I want to give him an honor like unbelievable. What would be the most unbelievable way to honor a person that I really cherish? Haman assumes the references to Haman. So he thinks to himself, what would he want? What are you going to do? Money, I have money. Property, I have property. You know, it'd be really cool if I could wear one of the king's robes that the whole nation has seen the king wear. And it could be, no one's allowed to wear the king's robe, even if it's put back in the closet. If I could publicly, for one occasion, but he doesn't say me, he says, if you would let that person you want to honor wear your royal robe and ride publicly on your royal horse, with someone walking in front of that horse, leading the horse down the main highway, Kings Highway, Brooklyn, Jamboree in Orange County, Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles, Collins Avenue in Miami Beach. If you will have him walk the main highway, calling out to the public, hear ye, hear ye. This is the way the king honors the man whom he most cherishes. And people will look out and see that man wearing the king's robe on the king's horse. That would be great. The king hears this and understands, I wasn't intending that Haman should think I'm referring to him. I'm thinking of Mordechai who saved my life. But I'm beginning to realize that that's how Haman thinks, how he's projecting himself in the king's robe and the king's horse. It only validates and verifies my suspicion that he's plotting with my wife to take over the monarchy. Well, first the king says, go ahead and do it. Do that. One of my robes, my horse, do it for Mordechai the Jew. Haman is in shock, but he has to do it now. So he robes Mordechai in the king's robe, and he put him on the horse, and he walks down the main thoroughfare. Hear ye, hear ye. Thus does the king honor the man whom he cherishes. For the king's purpose, it now is seen that if you alert the king to any rumors of an assassination, the reward will be great. He also honors Mordechai, and this evil king is not even connecting that I've given the order to wipe out all the Jews, but I'm honoring Mordechai the Jew. It's like what we learned in one of our previous Thursday night classes and other classes about how in 1492, when Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain exiled all the Jews, they said, but not Don Isaac Abravanel. He, the treasurer of the royal funds, we'd like you to stay behind. You're a Jew that we want. All the other Jews have to go. So the king is ready to kill out all the Jews, but he honors Mordechai. According to the Midrash, Haman leads them during the main thoroughfare, and as he's going, his daughter is on one of the balconies that overlooks that thoroughfare. And in those days, they did not have indoor plumbing. So if a person urinated, they urinated in a pot, and every so often, once a day or however often, they would dump out the pot from their windows. That's what it was like in the old days. The places stank of urine. Everybody would dump their pots. They collected their day's urine and other stuff, and they dumped it. There was no indoor plumbing. As the daughter of Haman, like everyone else looking on the balconies, sees this procession marching forward, a man in royal garment on a horse and some lowlife leading the horse, she infers that the lowlife leading the horse is Mordechai the Jew, and that her father is the one on the horse. So as the horse approaches, she dumps the urine pot. And then realizes when the person gets drenched with urine and looks up, where'd that come from? She realizes she just dumped urine, a whole gallons of urine on her father. And in horrible despair, the Midrash tells us, and I believe it's Daf Yudbet Damed Bet, folio 12b in Megillah, or I'm off by a folio or two. In despair, she jumps out of the window, commits suicide, kills herself. Now Haman comes home, not like yesterday, so full of joy and excitement, inspired to put up a gallows and telling his wife and friends how he's number 2 in the kingdom, the king's favorite, and that even the queen invites him to parties. Now he comes and says, look what happened to me. I'm drenched in urine. Our daughter just jumped out the window. He's in shock. And before he even can absorb what has just happened in the last 2 hours, the king's royal courtesans or whatever come to gather him because Esther has invited the king and Haman to one more party, just like yesterday. Let's do another one just like the other one. Before he even has time to change his clothes and to really come to terms with what just happened. They're grabbing him and bringing him to the party. So in his head, he doesn't know what the heck's going on, but his daughter just killed herself, dumped urine on him. He just led Mordechai. In the king's head, what's going on right now, his wife wants to kill him, is conspiring with Haman to assassinate him. That's what's going through his mind. And what's going through Esther's mind is, I hope this works, or I'm going to be dead. And it brings us into the next chapter, where the party takes place. And at this point, Esther comes forth and says, I have to tell you, my king, a decree has been issued by you to wipe out my people, and also my parents, and also me. I wouldn't bring this to your attention, and I wouldn't ask you for something if it were simply a matter of our being persecuted. I wouldn't want to disrupt you and or annoy you over a mere decree to persecute us, but it's a decree to murder all of us. And the king says, Mihu Zeviezahu, I can't believe it. What are you talking about? Remember, the king does not even know she's Jewish. And she then discloses, I am a Jew. And this is this plot. And the king says, as I said, Mihu Zeviezahu, who in the world? King makes like he doesn't know. And remember, the text of the Megillah is written so that it can get by the king's censorship without making him out as the bad guy. It's for us to read between the lines. And she says, it's this man Haman. And the king is the king has already decided he wants to kill Haman, because he's got in his head that Haman is plotting right now to assassinate me. Haman doesn't even know that the king thinks he's going to assassinate him, because Haman's not even thinking of assassinating him. Haman likes things just the way they are. And so the king bursts out in rage on the balcony of his palace, and Haman races over to the shade, to like that French kind of leaning couch, and begs, standing over Esther, begs for his life, realizes, doesn't understand what she's up to, thought that she was his favorite to the degree that she invites him to the parties. She can't get it. He doesn't get it. And only now, as an Amalekite, learning that she's a Jew, is it little by little starting to come into his mind what's going on here. And the king is outside and furious, and Haman is begging, and Charvona, who is an assistant to the king. Charvona is right over there and comes forth. There's a Midrash that God sent an angel, who was not mentioned in the Megillah, now to push Haman onto Esther. He's shaking with terror. He's about to die if things don't go. He doesn't know what to do. He has seen what this king does when he gets drunk, what he did to his own wife Vashti. And shaking, he might have fallen anyway, but the angel gave him a push. And he lands on top of Esther. And just at that moment, the king comes in from the balcony and sees this man, Haman, physically on top of Esther. It looks like he's raping her. And the king, drunk, Agamlich Boshet, you've come now to capture my wife with me here in the palace? And Charvona, that assistant to the king, says to the king, not only that, but this guy also just built a gallows in his backyard with which to hang and execute Mordechai, the Jew who saved your life. And the king says, Teluhu alav. Well, then hang him on it. Hang Haman on it. And they hang Haman doesn't, it's all happening so fast, he doesn't know what hit him. They take him, they grab him from the party, they grab him off of Esther, bring him to his home, go to the tree, hang him, he's dead. The Midrash tells us that Charvona doesn't make sense. Charvona is one of the king's assistants. Charvona has no problem with the killing of the Jews. Charvona is an assistant and a friend of Haman. Why does he sell at Haman at that moment? The Midrash is that God by miracle sent Eliyahu Hanavi, the prophet Elijah, in the form of Charvona, to come forth and to save that life. We say that because it refers to Charvona Zachur Latov, and the expression Zachur Latov, may he be remembered for good, is associated with Eliyahu Zachur Latov. So Haman is killed, and the king says, okay, are we cool now to Esther? Esther's plot has worked. Haman has been stopped. The king is okay and is not killing her. But it's still on the books that the 13th of Adar in March, they're going to massacre all the Jews. The king says, is everything good? And she tells him, you've got that decree on the books. The king says, here's the problem. I want to accommodate you, but by royal protocol, any decree that the king issues in this kingdom never may be withdrawn. It may not be withdrawn. So I cannot nullify it. I can only issue a amendment, a superseding decree that says also on that same day, 13 Adar, I also am permitting all the Jews to kill all their enemies. Well, so you basically have your whole kingdom's going to kill each other. You've got two decrees that the non-Jews can kill the Jews, and another one the Jews can kill the non-Jews. I mean, how's that going to help the Jews who are such a minority? The king's point is, as with any pogrom, a pogrom can be only as successful as the police allow. In Russia, when the Tsar called a pogrom, the Tsar let the police know, don't interfere. And if the Tsar did not want a pogrom, the Tsar let the police know, if you see any signs of a pogrom, kill the pogromists right away, or lock them up. So now you've got two pogrom decrees in effect. If any non-Jews try to kill Jews on the 13th of Adar, I am telling the police, you are to stop those non-Jews and kill them. And if Jews try to kill their enemies, stand aside and let the Jews do whatever they're doing. And that's the meaning of it. So we're told that the Jews kill in capital city of Shushan, the Jews kill 500. And throughout the rest of the kingdom, the Jews kill 75,000. 75,500. And there's such a fear of the Jews in the kingdom that the enemies can't even raise their hands against the Jews. And there's one last thing, and with this we wrap it up now. Thank you for sticking through all of this, because I know we ran long. It says, and this is so easy to miss, that most everybody does miss it. On the one hand, in the decree in which the king agreed to let to let the enemies of Israel, let's just get that back up on the screen. Let me just get that back up. Come on. Let's just get that back up. In the decree in which, oh, I see. Should be this. And then it should be, let's get that off the screen. I'm sorry, just a second. I've got it up here. Let me just open it. Let's just get this off the screen. It's in the way. Okay, great. Oh, come on, stop. Try it again. Just take one more second. I'll get it up this way. And the decree that said that the anti-Semites can kill the Jews, it said, Minar ve'ad zaken haf penashim b'yom echad. You could kill all the Jews, from young to old, even little infant babies, even women, all on one day. And that was that decree. Now that the king is giving the Jews permission to go ahead and kill their enemies, the king gives a decree as follows. To this effect, the king permits Jews of every city to assemble, fight for their lives. They may destroy, massacre, and exterminate. Same wording. Lahashmid larog le'abed. All the women, all of them with women and children, and plunder their possessions. Identical wording to the other decree. Hatsarima tafinashim. The infants, the babies, the women, shlalam lavos, and likewise to take the possession of all the possession of their enemies. They may take possession. Shlalam lavos. Ushlalam lavos, just like in chapter 3, where the decrees are identical. The Jews go, and given that national permission, they do exactly what they're told they may do, and they kill out their enemies. And what happens? By killing out the 75,000 anti-Semites around the entire kingdom, plus the 500 leading anti-Semites, the Jews celebrate the line that we always recite at Havdalah time. La Yehudim hayata or, when they killed all their enemies, it says that the Jews, La Yehudim hayata or v'simcha v'sasan v'kar. And so, La Yehudim hayata or v'simcha v'sasan v'kar. What we recited Havdalah. The Jews emerged with light and joy, happiness and glory. And what ended up happening in the massacre that they did? On the one hand, like Sason, Simcha Sason, they were having a Simcha, they're happy, Yom Tov, they made a happy party to celebrate everything they had accomplished. And at the same time, it tells us in the Megillah text that when the Jews killed their enemies, it does not tell us that they killed, what about the women and what about the children? And it tells us that in their victory and destroying their enemies, Vayikalu HaYehudim, chapter 9, Asher b'Shushan gam b'yom arba asar, they had an extra day where they were given to kill more anti-Semites the next day in Shushan, the capital city, on the 14th. And so they killed another 300 on the 14th. It's sort of like Israel wiping out her enemies of Hamas in Gaza. and she is defeated. She won in northern Gaza, and then Gaza City, and like all these different places up north, and then Khan Yunis, and all that's left is Rafiach, that Netanyahu pledges they'll go into Rafiach and clean out the rest. So they cleaned out all their anti-Semites in the empire of 127 provinces, but there was still some left in Shushan. So they were given a second day for Shushan, and they cleaned out the last 300 for a total of 75,000 plus 500 and 300 is 800 in Shushan. And they killed Ish. What is meant by the word Ish? What does Ish mean? Ish means man. It tells us several things. They were given permission to kill women, but it says Ish. They killed only men. They were permitted to kill women. They killed only men. And they were permitted to kill babies, but they killed only Ish, men, not Yelad, not Yeladim. They killed only men. They did not take advantage of the decree that allowed them also to kill the women and the children. Now, what about the fact that the decree had permitted them to take the spoils? Uva biza lo shalchu et yadam. They did not lay their hands on the spoils. They were given that same permission, but they did not lay their hands on the spoils. With this, we're done. Two last things quick. You can certainly, of course, feel free to leave. First of all, I bring to your attention that the last verse of Megillah says, Mordechai Mordechai emerges number 2 to the king in the empire, and he's a giant for all the Jews. And it says, V'ratzui l'rov echav, and he was beloved by a majority of Jews. He was popular, not the multitude. He was popular with a majority of his brothers, which implies, you bet it implies that there were Jews, even after Mordechai saved their lives, there were Jews who were jealous of him, Jews that didn't like him. There's always people like that. Ask any rabbi of any synagogue, except the rabbi of Young Israel of Orange County, that you have people in the shul, especially when a rabbi is certain congregations, half the congregation hates the rabbi. And no matter how good, look at Israel, there's never been an Israeli politician who enjoys the universal approbation of the entire population. There are always people that can't stand him. Even Mordechai, who saves the lives of everybody, there were those who blamed him for creating the problem in the first place by refusing to bow down to Haman. And we're told that in addition to the 75,800 that the Jews killed, the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. These 10 were killed. And with this, I leave it for you. If you're curious, I have a very brief 3-minute video, but if you've learned enough, you have learned enough, you have fulfilled all your important student obligations. Let me just tell you this last thing. This blows the mind. I taught it once before. In the Megillah, where it lists the 10 Haman's sons who were hanged, in an actual parchment Megillah, like the one from which I'll be reading Saturday night and Sunday, for some unknown reason, through centuries upon centuries and millennia, there are 3 letters from among all the names of the 10 sons of Haman who were hanged that are written in itsy bitsy letter by convention, and no one ever knew why. The letters Tav, Shin, and Zayin. And no one knows why. And then someone figured out the following. What year are we in right now? Tav Shin Pei Dalet, 5784. What is Tav Shin Zayin? That is 707, or by convention, 5707. How many years ago was 5707? Because that's what the 3 letters are. Tav Shin Zayin, 707. By convention, we don't put the 1,000 number, the hey. So now we're in 784, and we write the 3 letters that happen to be 707. So that's 77 years ago. What year was 77 years ago? Now it's 2024. How good are you in math? I know one or two of you got majors in college in math. And even for the rest of you, let's do it the slow way. 77 from 2024. So first I'm going to subtract 24. That'll bring me to an even 2000. And I'll subtract 24 from 77. That's pretty easy. It's 53. Now I'm going to subtract 53 from 2000. And that's not too hard. That's 1947. So the year 5707 was 1947. What happened in 1947? In 1947, judgment was handed down by the Nuremberg trials, in which Nazi war criminals were put on trial. And the sentences included 11 of the Nazi war criminals. Some were given life in prison, other stuff. 11 was sentenced to be hanged. The night before the hanging of the 11 condemned to execution, one of them, Goering, had a pill, a cyanide pill, and he took a cyanide pill and killed himself in his prison cell. So instead of 11 being hanged the next morning, 10 were hanged. And as the 10 were brought to the gallows to be hanged, reporters from Associated Press and CBS heard Julius Streicher said his last two words were the words Purim Fest 1947. Purim, F-E-S-T, Purim Fest 1940. The hangings were in October. They weren't in March. And for some almost inexplicable reason, Julius Streicher, the editor-in-chief of the horrible newspaper, going blank a moment. I know I mention it all the time. It'll come to me. I just got so much going. I want to get done. Julius Streicher said Purim Fest 1947. So the Megillah for thousands of years had the letters Tuf Shin Zayin in small letters in the section where it talks about the hanging of the 10 sons. And indeed, in the year 5707, they were hanged. 10 were hanged on that day. Let's take a quick look. And this is it. For those of you who stuck with me,
Quickly.
this is really worth it. Okay. For those of you who didn't stick with me, I have no reason to blame you. Here we go.
Shushan, capital of Persia, 5th century BCE. Haman's final solution for eliminating the Jewish people is almost carried out, but the tables were turned. And the Jews killed the 10 sons of Haman, scourge of the Jews. And Esther said, if the king sees fit, give the Jews leave to do as today, and hang Haman's 10 sons on the gallows tomorrow. If Haman's 10 sons were already killed, why did Queen Esther ask to have them hanged? The sages say that whenever the word king is written, and not specifically King Xerxes, the reference is to the king of the universe, to God himself. Many years later, it became clear that Esther's tomorrow referred to a next day far in the future. 1945. Germany is vanquished, but the Nazis' final solution systematically murders 6 million Jews. When the war ends, leading Nazi criminals were put on trial in Nuremberg. 11 of them were sentenced to death, normally carried out by firing squad or electric chair, but surprisingly the court decides that they would be hanged.
Julius Streicher, death by hanging. Goering, death by hanging.
A few hours after sentencing, Goering commits suicide, leaving 10 remaining war criminals for execution by hanging. Esther asked for 10, and 10 remain. October 1946. The criminals are hanged one by one. Among them was Julius Streicher, described as the Jews' #1 enemy. CBS News reports from the scene.
We all expected that sometime during the procedure, the shout "Heil Hitler" would ring out. Wild-eyed Jew-baiter Julius Streicher bellowed out that greeting and followed it as he climbed the 13 stairs with the words, "Now I I go to God. Purim Festival 1946, and now to God.
Astonishingly, the Book of Esther has a strange anomaly. The names of Haman's sons are traditionally written with 3 smaller-sized letters, spelling out Tashaz, the numerical equivalent of the year 1946, the year that the 10 Nazi war criminals were hanged.
And of course, 1946 October is already the new calendar year that goes into 1947. So thank you very much for staying in this expanded, but I'm telling you, and you know how I teach, I was flying. For me, this was flying. And in under 2 hours, we did the 15-hour Megillah education, and I'm so grateful you stuck with it. Because this Saturday night, when you attend Megillah, and the halacha is both Saturday night and Sunday, you're supposed to hear it twice. It'll be in our shul. We're doing it 8:30 p.m. Saturday night and 11 o'clock a.m. on Sunday. You've all gotten the emails with all the information. There are, just a reminder, there are a total of 4 mitzvot that apply for Purim. The other 3 that apply, you're supposed to give a shalach manos, a mishloach manot, to at least one person. Many of you have customs to give it to many, but the obligation is only to one person, and it should be at least 2 foodstuffs that do not require further preparation. Second, there's matanot le'evyonim. You should give charity to at least 2 poor people. How much charity? At the very least, whatever small amount you choose to give. But the recommendation is it should be enough to purchase a nice meal. Does not have to be a $150 meal at a great restaurant, but rabbis nowadays in America suggest a donation of $20 to $25 should be enough to buy a nice meal with side dishes and dessert. And if you're a husband and a wife, you should not just give once, but each of you should be giving. So instead of giving $20 to $25, you'd be giving $40 to $50, and you're supposed to give to 2 people. So the man should give, and the woman should give. So a married couple should give $80 to $100. And you could either give it in hand, where I sent out, for example, a link to a society in Israel that sees that poor people on Purim are given that. And third and finally, over and above the hearing Megillah, in addition to shalach manos, mishloach manot, and matanot le'evyonim, you're also supposed to eat a seudah, a formal, lovely meal that includes wine, if you can tolerate it, otherwise grape juice. And you don't have to have bread, but it's good to have bread, so you could have hamotzi and then afterwards recite benching together with al hanisim. That typically is eaten on Sunday afternoon, on the afternoon of Purim, but you could have it even in the morning of Purim after Megillah reading. Many people have it in the afternoon, but if you happen to eat a nice meal on the night of Purim, Saturday night, that does not count as a seudah. It has to be on Purim day. So those are the halachas, and thank you again for being here. And happy Purim, even in a tough year. Happy Purim. I'll have more to say about that at the Purim program. Good night. Bye-bye. Shabbat shalom.
Purim